So yesterday we talked about the revolution and how the radical stage ended, and so that's what the bell ringer was about. And hopefully you're able to get through the DBQ, which was to look at those two documents, both having to do with the Declaration of Rights. The first one was the original document. The second one was the document that counteracted with the rights of women. And so you just needed to pick out the main idea and three pieces of evidence for both documents, and at the end talk about how they relate within a historical context and compare and contrast them. So just make sure you submit that when you're done. But as for the notes, today we'll continue by looking at the introduction of Napoleon, and that will happen during the Directory stage.
I wasn't done.
That's okay. We'll have time afterwards to finish. Plenty of time.
6 notes?
Yes, you had 6 notes. So the Directory was a committee, another committee, a legislative body of 5 men that were supposed to be used to make decisions. But I think we all know when there's a group of people making decisions, that's not always the easiest thing. And so they lacked an ability to stabilize France. They did prevent more private property from being taken from people.
So what was the directory?
The Directory was a legislative body that made executive decisions.
I'm just speaking for the people.
There was 5 of them, and they lacked the ability to stabilize France.
My computer started.
What?
Okay, no.
They did stop private property from being abolished, from being taken from people. But when elections were held, a large amount of constitutional monarchists were elected. So there was still a considerable percentage of the people that favored a constitutional monarchy. Not necessarily in Paris, but throughout France. Eventually, more protests and riots broke out, and they called in one of their more successful generals in order to establish order. And that, of course, will be Napoleon Bonaparte.
Reload.
And I say successful young general because he was made a general at the age of 24 after having some successful campaigns against the British. He did allow his troops to use fire on the protesters in 1795. So it showed that he was tough and he was willing to take extreme measures to create order. And his continued success against the British won't last forever, though, especially in places like Egypt. And then, of course, since he was a Navy or an Army man, he didn't necessarily have the ability to defeat Britain's greatest source of power, which was its Navy. But despite these setbacks and the fact that they couldn't fully defeat Britain, and this will be important later on in Napoleon's career, he will eventually be made a temporary consul. And consul is spelled Consul. And that will happen in 1799. Now that word, as they pointed out in the crash course video yesterday, is significant because they're kind of catering this new government to look like the old Roman Empire, because a consul, Consul, used to be one of the chief executives of the state.
Consul.
Mm-hmm. And there are also other reasons why people thought maybe Napoleon should be in charge because France was having problems with issues abroad as well. For instance, on the island of Haiti, there was a large-scale slave revolt.
I wonder why.
It's so widespread that even the British and Spanish are concerned. Napoleon attempted to send 20,000 troops to bring it under control.
Even the who were concerned?
Even the British and Spanish were concerned
Of the slaves?
about the slave revolt. They believed it could spread. So Napoleon sent 20,000 troops in 1802. And the leader of the slave revolt was brought to France, where he died.
Yeah, okay. How'd they pick out the leader?
He basically took upon himself being a general and dressed like one and stuff like that.
He kind of snuck his way into history.
Yes.
Any other person could have done that.
There was some evidence that he was good at organizing the slaves and resisting the French. But anyway, despite this success, which Napoleon was given credit for, the slave revolt continued, and eventually France is going to give up, and Haiti wins its independence by 1804.
So Haiti is now like a private.
It's its own country, yeah.
Oh, is it an island?
It is an island, yeah.
Cool. That's really cool, actually. I don't know that.
It's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere.
Well, you know,
You win some, you lose some.
they still exist.
Yes,
It's still its own country.
it's its own country. It technically shares the island with the Dominican Republic.
Hades now sounds like a very slumish Haiti. That sounds like an African war zone. Like a blood diamond.
No, they don't have diamonds.
Hades.
Napoleon and Imperial France. And so historians, starting with this point, have started to ask, as he begins to consolidate power, did he expand upon the revolution, or was he basically taking the country backwards? Napoleon himself seemed that he wanted to, of course, just make this about himself. He wanted to increase authority. And that's different than the country's expectations, but just from him personally. He created master plans with extreme detail. And so his scheming to consolidate power had a lot of planning go into it. He eventually took the title of First Consul, meaning that he was a citizen higher than all the rest. A new constitution is created. And this allows universal male suffrage, so all men could vote. He also, in this constitution, has two legislative bodies. Two legislative bodies. And lastly, this is approved by what is called a plebiscite. And this is spelled PLEBISCITE.
Wait. Yeah.
That's PLEBISCITE.
City.
A plebiscite meant that it was going to be approved by the people in a vote. In 1802, Napoleon asked the legislature to make him consul for life.
Make him what?
Consul for life.
Did he have any way of swaying what they were going to say?
Yeah, because he pushed this constitution, which set up the legislature, which got these people their jobs in the first place. So you could argue that.
And the fact that he has control of the entire army.
I don't think they were afraid of that.
I mean, it's he even said he drafted a lot of young men.
He would over time, yes, but
Over
there's no evidence that the legislature was intimidated just through military means.
It was like Cromwell. You know, he had the loyalty of the army against the crown.
That's true, but Napoleon already had the military before the legislature was created. I mean, he could have done this completely without them.
You think so?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, also under these changes, all the old privileges were once again denied. So all the privileges, for instance, the aristocrats had, those were denied. Government jobs were open to talent. So working for the government meant it wasn't because of who you were related to, but based on the talent that you had.
What's the name of that thing when you get a job?
Civil service?
That was called?
Merit system?
No, it's like when your family has ties or something into it.
Nepotism?
Is it nepotism?
Yes.
Yep.
He also created a fair system of taxation. And created a centralized system of government.
I gotta go take Jack off. That's not me. Sorry. Jack. Oh, I mean, I guess you keep going. There you go. I was gonna cut you off so my phone's gonna die, but no, we're good. So. We're good. 55. It was at 90 before we started class.
But law, education, and a new elite would be created. And most of this would happen because of what's called the Napoleonic Code.
Oh. My computer just turned off.
The Napoleonic Code. Is it charged?
Yeah, it's charged. Turn back on.
And they mentioned Napoleonic Code in a video the other day. Does anybody know the U.S. state that uses elements of the Napoleonic Code?
U.S. state,
Yes.
Maryland.
Nope.
U.S. District of Columbia. Wisconsin.
Louisiana.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it used to be the major port place of the French territory that we purchased in,
Oh,
known
wow, okay,
as-
that makes sense now.
known as the Louisiana
I was gonna
Purchase.
say like, I
In fact, one of the greatest concentrations of French-speaking people you can find in southern Louisiana.
But actually, French people there still.
They speak a Cajun version of
Cajun.
French.
Is that spicy?
They do like spices, yes.
Indeed, indeed. How are they so? How do they like Cajun spices if they're poor? You said they're poor, very poor.
There is a high poverty rate in southern Louisiana, yeah.
So how do they get spices?
I don't think spices, this isn't, 1400 Western Europe. They can afford spices. They're not that expensive.
Well, maybe so.
Anyway, the Napoleonic Code, 1804. The main thing that the Napoleonic Code that would do was it would establish uniformity. The problem with the French law before this is there were many different systems and different types of laws that just made things confusing. So the main thing that it would establish would be the Napoleonic Code would be uniformity. Uniformity.
Okay, I'm trying to open this up. It just took forever. Turn it off or something.
Napoleonic Code, uniformity. The Napoleonic Code will also recognize the right to property. Equality in the law. Equality in the law. It will outlaw arbitrary arrest. So you just can't be arrested for no reason. Does anybody know in the English system the right to know why you're being arrested? Does anybody know what that phrase is?
In
It's a Latin phrase.
in America?
Jack, do you know? Are you raising your hand, Jack? It's two words. One begins with a H, the other one begins with a C.
Was it like?
It's a Latin phrase.
I just had criminal justice
I
last
know.
quarter.
I'll just say. Like
Don't look at
something stupid.
Habeas corpus. But
That's why I don't remember.
one thing that was probably negative about the Napoleonic Code is it did establish a paternal system. A paternal system. So the right over the household always went to the father. Even if the woman had her own job or inherited her own money, all that came under control of the man.
So what if there was a father, two children, a daughter and a son? The wife is dead. The father dies.
And then we go to the son.
But so the daughter would also inherit money, but because of the house, he's the top of the household, he gets the money.
He'll get to make all the decisions involving the money.
Oh, wow. What do you know?
But as part of establishing the Napoleonic Code, he would also improve the educational system. Establishing high schools, military and technical schools,
Like West Point.
yeah, and a national university system.
Cambridge. Isn't that in
That's in Britain.
Britain? What's the famous? What's like a big famous school in Britain?
Oxford?
Oxford, that's all. Is that Ivy League?
They don't have an Ivy League, but if they did, it would
That
be
would
it.
be-
Yeah. The other items that I'll mention, of course, that they talked about in the video, so I won't go too much into this, would be the Concordat of 1801. Concordat is spelled
Ad?
Cordat.
Oh, it's act.
Concordat.
Ad?
Concordat of 1801. And this will make peace with the church. The church has to recognize that France got to take its property and that priests are paid employees of the government. But in turn, the Catholic Church gets to be the official religion of France. And as part of this, in his marriage to Josephine, at the ceremony, which is attended, of course, by church officials, they're about to crown him, and he takes the crown himself and declares him Emperor of France.
He's put on a head.
Yes.
What a savage. He deserves it. Would you make yourself the emperor if you lived back then?
Yeah, I probably could. It'd be easy to trick people if you were from the future.
If so, but I mean, I guess supposedly you would be the best choice because you have the most modern knowledge as well as you're a government associate teacher.
Yeah.
You'd be a good choice for running a government a good way and good economy.
So Europe during Napoleonic Wars. After the revolution ended, the coalition system had kind of dissolved. So Austria, Prussia, Britain, they really weren't cooperating much after the radical phase of the revolution ended. However, there were already situations arising that Napoleon could take advantage of because there are many small states that were inspired by France's revolution. And so there were some independent republics that used to belong to Austria and in the old Holy Roman Empire.
No, just picking on the weed.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like you.
Some of these states formed what is called, the ones in modern day Germany, they formed the Confederation of the Rhine. Some Europeans also admired Napoleon's reforms, like equality before the law and careers open to talent. So some Europeans appreciated the things that he was doing. On the other hand, they also knew if they came under Napoleon's thumb, all the decision making would come out of Paris and they would lose their independence. And in fact, just two broad general things that's going to happen. He's going to eventually defeat Austria and Russia. And through that, he's going to end up controlling Italy.
If you count him as the dominator of Russia, doesn't that mean he actually conquered the most land of all time?
Yeah, but he beat Russia while fighting them in main Europe. He didn't beat them while fighting inside
I
Russia.
thought he chased the Russians all the way until.
Well, chasing the Russians purposely, they decided not to fight them directly in most cases. They just continually withdrew and destroyed the resources.
So that the truce would deprecate and then die.
Yes.
But at the same, I feel like them retreating and then the big fact that they can't even stand up to it means they probably could have easily conquered it had he been more logistically intelligent. Had he had like supply routes developed.
Yeah, but you could argue them, letting him get close and continually retreating was the best military strategy. Because maybe they could, like when he first marched in with hundreds of thousands, they might not have been able to defeat him directly.
Oh yeah, I definitely couldn't have.
So anyway, he also defeated Russia and Prussia in battle to take control of modern Germany.
We know how that goes after that.
And in fact, the Treaty of Tilsit, which is spelled Tilsit, in the Treaty of Tilsit, Prussia and Russia made peace with Napoleon. After all this, Napoleon has one objective in particular that rises to the top, and that is to defeat the country that he couldn't take on when he was just a young general, and that would be Britain. So in 1806, he developed what was called the Continental System. 1806, the Continental System. He decides since he can't defeat them because of their navy, he will then try to defeat them economically. And the Continental System basically is going to blockade the British. So that way they cannot sell goods to Europe. Well, the blockade is going to be through the European countries. Since he's won all this territory and signed treaties with Prussia and Russia, he is hoping then all of the states of Europe will just refuse to buy goods from Britain. But there are two big flaws with that. One is that Britain was already all over the world, so they could just sell goods to other places. And two, not everyone in Europe was willing to cooperate.
Who didn't cooperate?
Russia was one of the biggest that would refuse to cooperate.
Yeah, kind of Russia depends on those small ports they have.
Mm-hmm.
Still, they're gonna lose a lot. You figure it damaged their economy.
Yeah, it's not like they just didn't notice it at all. During this time, he also made some interesting family decisions that will end up causing him more problems down the road. One of them is he made his siblings, brothers and sisters, monarchs of some of the kingdoms that he took over. While they weren't the biggest, incompetent people on the face of the earth, they weren't nearly as talented as Napoleon. He also ended up divorcing Josephine in 1809. and then married Marie Louise.
I was doing all this while also conquering.
He had some free time occasionally. The importance of Maria Louise, though, was that she was also a member of the Habsburg family. So now he also has the ability to say, see, I'm part of royalty. So why don't we go ahead and stop there for today. Tomorrow we will finish with the rest of Napoleon's career. For the remainder of class, make sure that you get done the DBQ if you haven't already. Also, if you go to the inbox, which on the far left-hand side of Canvas is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th item down. It looks like a little inbox. If there's notifications in there, like if it says the number 3, it means I sent you 3 emails about work that you didn't turn in for Unit 5. So make sure that you complete that.